Here the heart will melt. Here the tide will turn. Here it all will soar. And in the end we just walk.
Lawrence Lessig is a professor of law at Harvard Law School and director of the Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics at Harvard University, nationally recognized scholar, author, speaker. Professor Lessig is one of our nation's leading authorities on constitutional law and campaign finance reform. Prior to teaching at Harvard, Professor Lessig clerked for Judge Richard Posner on the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago, and subsequently for Justice Anton Scalia on the U.S. Supreme Court. In addition to serving on the boards of other nonprofit organizations, Professor Lessig is on the advisory board of the Sunlight Foundation, an organization dedicated to using the internet and technology to foster a more open and transparent government. Many of our witnesses make many sacrifices to appear before us, but none make a greater sacrifice than your son, who interrupted his family vacation to accompany his father at this hearing, so we thank him for joining us. Professor Lessig, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I commend this committee for holding this hearing, which is really a celebration of the extraordinary grassroots movement led by new organizations such as Free Speech for People and Move to Amend, and more established grassroots organizations such as People for the American Way and Common Cause, that has developed to demand the reversal of Citizens United and an end to the system for funding elections that leads most Americans to believe that this government is corrupt. Yet this hearing could only be the beginning of the serious work that will be required to address the problem in America's democracy that Citizens United has come to represent. And that problem can be stated quite simply. The people have lost faith in their government. They have lost the faith that their government is responsive to them because they have become convinced that their government is more responsive to those who fund your campaigns. As all of you, Democrats, Republicans, and independents alike, find yourselves forced into a cycle of perpetual fundraising, you become, or at least most Americans believe you become, responsive to the will of the funders. Yet the funders are not the people. 0.26% of Americans give more than $200 in a congressional campaign. 0.05% give the maximum amount to any congressional candidate. 0.01%, the 1% of the 1%, give more than $10,000 in an election cycle. And in the current presidential election cycle, 0.00063%, that's 196 citizens, have funded 80% of the super PAC spending so far. There are two elections in America today. Not the primary and general election, but the money election and the voting election. And to win in the voting election, you must first compete in the money election. But unlike the voting election, not every citizen can participate equally in the money election. Instead, it is only the very few who can compete at all. And it is because of this money election that we have evolved a system in which the elected are dependent upon the tiniest slice of America. Yet that tiny slice is in no way representative of the rest of America. This, senators, is corruption. It's not corruption in the criminal sense. I'm not talking about bribery or quid pro quo influence peddling. It is instead corruption in a sense that our framers would certainly and easily have recognized. They architected a government that in this branch at least, as Federalist 52 puts it, would be, quote, dependent upon the people alone. But you have evolved a government that is dependent upon the people and dependent upon the funders. And that different and conflicting dependence is a corruption of our framers' design, now made radically worse by the errors of Citizens United. But in responding to those errors, please do not lose sight of one critical fact. On January 20th, 2010, the day before Citizens United was decided, our democracy was already broken. Citizens United may have shot the body, but the body was already cold. And any response to Citizens United must also respond to that more fundamental corruption. Now, how you do that, how you do that will be as important as what you do. For America's cynicism about this government, whether fair or not, is too profound to imagine that this Congress alone could craft a response that would earn the confidence of the American people. Instead, this Congress needs to find a process that could discover the right reforms that itself could earn the trust of the American people. That process should not be dominated by politicians or law professors, indeed, by any of the professional institutions of American government. It should be dominated instead by the people. Now, I have submitted today to this committee the outline of one such plan, what I call a series of citizen conventions, constituted as a kind of civic jury and convened to advise Congress about the best means for reform. But whether it is this process or another, your challenge is to find a process that could convince America that a corrupted institution can fix itself. The confidence of the American people in this government, in you, is at an historic low. That's not because of the number of Democrats sitting in Congress. It's not because of the number of Republicans. And it won't change simply by changing the number of Democrats or Republicans sitting in Congress. Instead, confidence is at a historic low because of a dependence that all of you and all of us have allowed to evolve in this government, one that draws you away from a dependence upon the people alone. I thank you for the beginning this hearing represents, and more importantly, I thank the extraordinary citizens who have united to get you to focus upon this issue. But I urge you now to act in a way that has a real chance to restore that confidence of the people in their government. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Public. And my view is this process is necessary because as Americans look to this institution and frankly to people like me, law professors or lawyers who talk about this issue, their eyes glaze over because they can't believe that the institution has the capacity to change itself to deal with what is the core problem. So that's the way that bringing in another voice into this process could aid this Congress, I believe, in thinking about what response might actually earn the trust of the American people.
Governor Roemer, tell me how the dynamics of the campaign were affected by that decision.
To your first point, when I was a member of the House of Representatives, I chose not to accept PAC money. I think I was the only member who made that choice. I came from a state that had a culture, a history of tolerance of political corruption, if I could say that gently. I love Louisiana, let me say that clearly. I ran for governor in that state, the only candidate not to take PAC money. I had no chance. I was sixth in a five-man race. But I won in the end with less money, but making money the issue. So I know this can be done. When I ran for president, this time after being out of politics for 20 years and very happy a senator, let me just say the best 20 years of my life, building community banks is what I do. No federal bailout money, just lean and clean and profitable. When I ran for president, thinking that maybe we could connect with the American people on the issue of money, I found a couple interesting dynamics that surprised me. One is the whole public out there depends on the debates as to their impressions of people. And every Republican in that race kind of had their moment in the sun. They would rise and fall with those debates. Well, interestingly enough, I was the only candidate running who'd been elected governor and a congressman and was a successful businessman, and I was not invited to a single debate, not one of the 23 nationally televised debates. And you've known me for a long time. I love the debates. I mean, that's where I'm alive. And I think I made a mistake, Mr. Chairman. I gave a speech in Iowa early in February of 2011, and it was Romney, Santorum, and several others were there, Newt Gingrich. And I got the only standing ovation, and I had talked about eliminating the ethanol subsidy and the oil subsidy. I mean, the 1,200 people in that room were like stunned about the sacrifices that we have to make to get this government strong again. And so I talked about their sacrifice and mine, and I got a standing O. I was not invited to another debate after that. I just couldn't raise the money. So I found, much to my surprise, after 20 years gone, that politics had changed. And it's like Larry Lessig, a friend. I trust Larry completely. It's like Larry Lessig just said. There are two races that you run. The race for money and then the race for votes. And what I tried to do running for president was to run the race for money so that I would be free after elected to do the right thing. And I wouldn't have to call Wall Street for bank reform. I wouldn't have to. I would listen to them, but I wouldn't have to call them. I wouldn't have to have a fundraiser there. I wouldn't have to go to the top of the money pile to get my answers. And I found that it affected everything I do. I raised about $750,000. I was the average gift, $45. I was the only candidate that got federal matching funds at the end. I qualified. I had it from all 50 states. I paid my bills, and I returned a substantial amount of money back to the federal match. It can be done. You got to get on the debate, and it's all about the money.
Here the heart will melt. Here